7 months ago, my world turned upside down. It was as though someone had ripped the ground from beneath me, leaving me in free fall. That was when I discovered my wife, now my soon-to-be ex-wife, STBXW, was cheating on me. At first, I couldn't believe it. Denial clung to me like a desperate, protective shield, but soon the cracks formed, and the truth seeped through. I tried to fight it, to ignore the signs, but they were relentless, as though the universe itself wanted to ensure I knew. The pain was a beast of its own, clawing at my insides and gnawing away at my sense of self. I went through every imaginable stage of heartbreak: denial, anger, the crushing weight of despair, and the futile attempts to win her back. I was a wreck, emotionally, physically, mentally. Depression took hold, and I sank into a deep abyss. The worst part? I never confronted her about it. I couldn't. Instead, I became a ghost in my own home, a shell of the man I once was. She must have noticed. How could she not? My mood darkened, my energy waned, and my presence was no longer warm or engaging. But if she knew, she never acknowledged it. Perhaps she didn't care. Or perhaps she thought I was simply going through something unrelated to her betrayal. Either way, her indifference was a dagger to my heart. Months passed, and something inside me snapped. I realized I was done, not just with her, but with the marriage itself. I was done with the pretense, the suffocating silence, and the half-hearted interactions. 2 or 3 months ago, I mentally checked out entirely. I started preparing for a future without her, for a life that didn't include the weight of betrayal constantly pressing down on me. I avoided her as much as I could. The house became a battleground of avoidance, a dance of silence and distance. Conversations were clipped, almost non-existent. If she asked me a question, my responses were monosyllabic. Yes, no, maybe. Sometimes, I'd even go with "I don't know," just to avoid engaging any further. As the days dragged on, I began leaving subtle hints of my intentions. Divorce lawyer bills were left out in the open, and I'm certain she saw them. Even our children noticed something was amiss. They asked me directly if we were getting a divorce. I couldn't lie to them, so I gave the age-appropriate grown-ups can't always stay together talk. My wife was in the room when I had this heart-wrenching conversation, and she didn't say a word. Not one objection or comment. Her silence was deafening, a confirmation of everything I already knew. Then came the turning point, a chance encounter with an old acquaintance from school. Monica. The name alone stirred long-forgotten memories of innocent flirtations and unspoken possibilities. Monica and I had always shared a unique chemistry, something unspoken but undeniable. Back then, I lacked the courage to act on it, and before I could muster the nerve, life took her family away to another town. When we crossed paths again after all those years, the spark was still there, stronger than ever. Our conversation flowed effortlessly, the years melting away as though we'd never been apart. She even asked me out, a boldness I admired. But I wasn't the same person I used to be, and my circumstances were far from ideal. I told her the truth about my situation, about my crumbling marriage, and my resolve to officially separate before I even considered dating. Monica respected my boundaries and gave me her number, telling me to reach out once I'd sorted things out. Her excitement about reconnecting mirrored my own, and for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. Her presence in my life, brief as it was, became the catalyst I needed. I went home that day with a clarity I hadn't felt in a long time. It was time to confront my wife, to lay everything out on the table and move forward, no matter how painful it might be. That evening, I returned home with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. I sat down in the living room, the same space that had witnessed countless shared moments between us, both joyful and mundane. Now, it felt cold, almost foreign. I waited for her to come home, rehearsing the words I needed to say over and over in my head. For once, the weight of this confrontation didn't terrify me. In fact, I found myself smiling, almost manically, at the thought of finally breaking free from this emotional limbo. When she arrived, I asked her to sit down. There was no tension in my voice, just a calm resolve that surprised even me. She hesitated, perhaps sensing that this wasn't going to be an ordinary conversation. When she finally sat, I took a deep breath and began. "I've known about your affair for a long time," I said, my voice steady. "I assumed you knew I knew, especially given how distant I've been these past few months. You didn't seem to care, and honestly, neither do I anymore." Her expression froze, as if she'd been struck by an invisible force. For the first time in months, I had her undivided attention. "I want to move on with my life," I continued. "I've already emotionally checked out of this marriage, and I'm ready to start dating again. It's time for us to face the truth. This isn't working. I think we both know it's time to get a divorce." What followed was something I could never have anticipated. She didn't argue, at least not at first. Instead, she broke down in tears, violent, uncontrollable sobs that shook her entire body. This wasn't the composed crying of someone seeking sympathy. It was raw, desperate, and unfiltered. The sound of her anguish filled the room, and for a moment, I felt something close to pity. But pity wasn't enough to sway me. Between sobs, she began begging. "Please, please give me another chance. It didn't mean anything. It was a mistake. A stupid, thoughtless mistake. We can fix this. Counseling, therapy, whatever it takes. Just please don't do this." Her words came out in a panicked rush, a desperate attempt to undo the damage that had been festering for months. I sat there, unmoved, letting her words wash over me like a cold, indifferent tide. "I thought you'd be happy," I replied, my tone as calm as ever. "You've had months to end things with him, to come clean, or to even show me that you care. You didn't. You chose this path, and now you want to turn back? You can't be that naive." Her tears intensified, but I didn't stop. "If our marriage was so broken, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you give me a chance to fix it before you decided to go behind my back? Do you think our kids deserve this? Growing up in a broken home because of your selfish choices?" She had no answer. Her excuses melted into incoherent babbling, her words a jumble of guilt and regret. Finally, I stood up, the weight of the moment pressing heavily on my shoulders. "You didn't just hurt me," I said, my voice low but firm. "You destroyed everything we built together. And for what? A fleeting affair with someone who clearly means more to you than your own family." She tried to argue, but I silenced her with a single look. "It's too late. There's no fixing this. I don't trust you, and I don't love you anymore. Whatever we had is gone." At that moment, she collapsed into a heap of despair. Her cries filled the room, and for a second, I thought about comforting her, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I called her sister, explaining the situation as briefly as I could. When her sister arrived, she gave me a sympathetic look, but her attention quickly shifted to my wife, who was now barely coherent. As they left, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. For the first time in months, I could breathe. The oppressive weight of her betrayal was still there, but it no longer suffocated me. I was finally free, or at least, I was on my way to freedom. The days following that confrontation were a strange mixture of calm and chaos. On one hand, I felt a liberating sense of control over my life for the first time in months. On the other, there was an endless stream of emotional fallout to navigate. Not just my own, but that of our children, her family, and even, surprisingly, some of her friends. Her sister, who had taken her in that night, reached out to me the next morning. "She's not in good shape," she said, her tone laced with concern. "I don't think she's slept or eaten much. She keeps crying and saying she's ruined everything." I appreciated her honesty, but it didn't sway my resolve. I had made up my mind. There was no going back. This wasn't an impulsive decision born out of anger. It was a calculated step toward reclaiming my peace. My focus shifted to the children. Their well-being became my top priority. They had already sensed the tension in the house, and I knew the divorce would be hard on them. I sat them down once again, this time with a clearer plan in mind. "You two are my world," I told them, my voice steady but warm. "I love you more than anything, and I'll always be here for you, no matter what. This isn't your fault, and it doesn't change how much your mom and I love you." They had questions, of course. Why was this happening? Couldn't it be fixed? I answered as honestly as I could without dragging them into the painful details. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes," I said carefully. And sometimes those mistakes mean they can't stay together. But that doesn't mean we stop being a family. Their responses were a mix of tears and quiet nods, and my heart ached for the confusion they must have felt. I promised them that no matter what, they would always have my love and support. I also decided to increase their support system, counseling sessions, quality time, and involving family members to shower them with affection. They deserved a foundation of stability, even amidst the turmoil. Meanwhile, I began preparing for the legal side of things. I gathered evidence of her affair, not because I wanted revenge, but because it could protect me during the divorce proceedings. In my country, infidelity can have significant legal implications, potentially affecting alimony and custody arrangements. It wasn't about punishing her. It was about securing a fair outcome for myself and the children. The thought of the affair lingered in my mind like a bitter aftertaste. I scheduled an STI test, not because I suspected anything, but because I needed peace of mind. I also decided to pursue DNA tests for the children. That decision weighed heavily on me. The possibility that they might not be mine filled me with dread, but I had to know. If nothing else, it was for their sake. They deserved clarity, and so did I. Amidst all of this, Monica remained a distant but hopeful light. We hadn't spoken since our chance encounter, but her words stayed with me. She respected my boundaries, and that only deepened my admiration for her. Life was messy, as she had said, but perhaps there was a way to navigate through the chaos and find something meaningful on the other side. One evening, as I sifted through legal documents and made plans for the next steps, I found myself reflecting on Monica's perspective. Her life hadn't been easy either. She had faced her own tragedies, and yet here she was, ready to take risks and embrace the uncertainties of life. It was inspiring in a way, and it gave me hope that there could be a future worth fighting for beyond the pain of my current circumstances. I decided I wouldn't contact her until the divorce was finalized. It was a matter of principle. I refused to become the very thing I despised. But knowing she was out there, waiting with the same cautious optimism, gave me strength. It was a reminder that life could move forward, even after the darkest chapters. With each passing day, my resolve hardened. I knew the road ahead would be challenging, but I was ready to face it. The life I had once known was over, but perhaps, just perhaps, a better one awaited on the horizon. As the days turned into weeks, the emotional toll of the situation became glaringly evident. My wife, now firmly in the role of my soon-to-be ex-wife, spiraled into what seemed like a bottomless pit of regret. Her sister occasionally updated me on her state, painting a picture of a woman consumed by guilt and despair. But even these reports did little to sway my conviction. The reality was simple. There was no salvaging what we had. Trust, the foundation of any relationship, had been shattered beyond repair. Without trust, there could be no love, no partnership, and certainly no future. I had loved her deeply once, but the person she had become was unrecognizable to me. The memories of our life together, once a source of joy, now felt tainted. Every thought of her brought not warmth, but discomfort, a visceral reaction to the betrayal that had upended my life. When I thought back to our marriage, I couldn't pinpoint any glaring issues before the affair. To me, we had been happy. We shared laughter, intimacy, and a sense of partnership that I once believed was unshakable. But clearly, I had been blind to something she felt was missing. Instead of voicing her concerns, she sought solace in the arms of another man. That choice, her choice, had destroyed the very fabric of what we had built. I found myself questioning everything. Had she ever truly loved me? Had the moments we shared been genuine, or were they just a prelude to this betrayal? Her actions had cast a shadow over every happy memory, and I hated that she had taken even that from me. Yet, amidst the anger and pain, I knew one thing for certain. I didn't want her back. Reconciliation wasn't just unlikely, it was impossible. I couldn't imagine a future where I would willingly subject myself to the constant reminder of her infidelity. Even if she claimed to change, even if she swore on her life that it would never happen again, I knew I couldn't believe her. And without belief, what was the point? Despite my clarity, the weight of the situation still pressed heavily on my shoulders. Her pleas echoed in my mind at the most unexpected moments, and I couldn't help but feel the edges of guilt creeping in. Not guilt for ending the marriage. I knew that was the right decision, but guilt for not being able to fix what was broken, for not being enough to keep her from straying. I sought solace in routine. I kept busy with work, with the children, and with planning the logistics of the divorce. The process was draining, but it gave me a sense of control. Every step I took toward separation felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, like peeling away the layers of pain she had inflicted. Monica remained a quiet presence in the back of my mind, a beacon of hope that I clung to in the darker moments. But I stayed true to my word and avoided contacting her. As much as I wanted to explore what could be, I refused to start something new while my old life was still tangled in legalities and unresolved emotions. I owed it to myself and to her to come into any future relationship as a whole person, not as someone dragging the weight of a broken marriage behind him. One day, my wife asked to meet. Her voice over the phone was shaky, almost unrecognizable. "Please," she begged, "just give me a chance to explain. I know I can't undo what I've done, but I need to talk to you." I agreed, not out of a desire to reconcile, but because I needed closure. I needed to face her one last time and put everything on the table. I prepared for the meeting meticulously, making notes of the questions I wanted to ask and the points I needed to make. I wanted to remain calm and composed, to act as the man I once was before all of this, the man I aspired to be again. When I arrived at her sister's house, the sight of her stopped me in my tracks. She looked like a shadow of the woman I once knew. Her face was pale, her eyes red and swollen from countless nights of crying. Her posture was hunched, as though the weight of her guilt had physically bent her. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of pity, but it was quickly replaced by the cold realization that this was the result of her own choices. We sat across from each other in the living room. She was trembling, her hands clasped tightly together in her lap. Her sister sat nearby, a silent observer, her expression a mixture of concern and quiet judgment. The conversation that followed was one of the most draining experiences of my life. My wife apologized over and over, her voice breaking with every word. She didn't try to shift the blame or make excuses. She owned her actions completely. But her remorse, while genuine, did little to move me. It was too late for apologies, too late for tears. "I never thought you'd find out," she admitted through sobs. "I thought it would be something I could keep hidden, something that wouldn't affect us. I was so stupid. I didn't realize how much I was hurting you, how much I was risking." Her words stung, but they didn't change the truth. "You didn't think I'd find out? That makes it worse, not better," I replied. "You were willing to betray me, our family, because you thought you could get away with it. That's not love. That's selfishness." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "You're right. I was selfish. I ruined everything. But I love you. I love our family. I'll do anything to fix this." "Anything?" Her desperation was palpable, but it only reinforced my resolve. "If you truly loved me, you wouldn't have done this," I said, my voice firm. "You made your choice, and now we're both living with the consequences." The meeting ended with no resolution, as I knew it would. But for the first time, I felt a sense of closure. I had said everything I needed to say, and there was nothing more to discuss. The closure I thought I had gained from that meeting was fleeting. The weight of it all still lingered, haunting me in the quiet moments. The aftermath wasn't just about her tears or apologies. It was about rebuilding myself, piece by piece. While my wife spiraled further into her guilt and despair, I focused on the path ahead, determined not to let her choices define my future. The days following that meeting were filled with logistics and decisions. I finalized the divorce paperwork, ensuring everything was fair but firm. I had no intention of dragging this process out longer than necessary. To me, every day spent in limbo was another day wasted. Her reaction to my resolve was as expected. More tears, more pleading. She promised everything under the sun. A one-sided open marriage, complete transparency, endless efforts to regain my trust. But her words felt hollow, like echoes in an empty room. I knew her desperation stemmed from the realization of what she had lost, but it wasn't enough. No promise, no gesture could undo the damage or rebuild what was broken. During this time, I also reached out to my lawyer about the timeline and evidence she had handed me. Her detailed confession and signed documents were handed over, not because I wanted to weaponize them, but because they were part of the process. This wasn't about revenge. It was about ensuring a clean break and protecting myself and the children. The children, as always, remained my top priority. I arranged for counseling sessions to help them process the changes in our lives. I wanted to shield them from as much of the fallout as possible. I involved family and friends in their lives, creating a support network that would reassure them they were loved, even as their parents parted ways. Every hug, every reassuring word I gave them was a reminder that no matter what, they had me to rely on. Amidst all this, Monica's presence loomed like a quiet beacon of hope. We hadn't spoken since our initial encounter, and I respected the boundaries we had set. But the thought of her lingered, a small light in the darkness. She symbolized a possibility, a chance for something real, something honest. Yet, I remained steadfast in my decision not to reach out until the divorce was finalized. I refused to repeat my wife's mistakes, even inadvertently. One morning, I received a call that took me by surprise. It was the wife of my wife's affair partner. She had discovered the truth after my wife confessed. Her voice was a mix of anger and relief, tinged with the exhaustion of someone who had suspected for far too long. We talked briefly, exchanging facts and details. She asked if we could meet to discuss the situation further, and I agreed, if only to provide her the clarity she deserved. When we met, it was clear she was grappling with her own storm of emotions. She thanked me for being honest and expressed her gratitude for the evidence I had shared. She, too, was beginning the process of ending her marriage. "I'm just glad to finally know the truth," she said, her voice firm despite the tears in her eyes. "I've spent so long doubting myself." Her strength inspired me. Despite the betrayal, she was handling it with a dignity and resolve that mirrored my own. As we parted ways, I realized how many lives my wife's choices had affected. Not just mine, but hers, our children's, and the AP's family as well. It was a web of pain that couldn't simply be untangled. The final step in my journey was perhaps the hardest, forgiving her, not for her sake, but for mine. I didn't want to carry the weight of hatred and resentment any longer. Forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation. It meant letting go of the anger that had consumed me for so long. It meant accepting that people make mistakes, sometimes devastating ones, and that life goes on. In the end, I chose to remember the good moments we shared, not as a way of excusing her actions, but as a way of honoring the parts of our life that were real. I chose to focus on the love I had for my children, the lessons I had learned, and the possibilities that lay ahead. The divorce was finalized a few months later. It was a bittersweet moment, but mostly, it was a relief. I reached out to Monica shortly afterward, as promised, and we began to reconnect. Our conversations were easy, our connection undeniable. She brought a lightness to my life that I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was a new beginning, a chance to build something honest and true. Looking back, I realized that life isn't about avoiding pain. It's about learning to navigate through it. And while the scars of betrayal would remain, they no longer defined me. I had faced the storm and come out on the other side, ready to embrace whatever came next.